For this project, you're going to need 1.5 yards of fabric that has a little bit of stretch to it. When you print your pattern pieces out, arrange them so they are edge to edge, not overlapping. Tape them together and cut it out. To make sure your pattern is the right size, you can double check with these little ruler marks. Here's an example of how you would lay out the entire pattern. The orange pieces are just kind of to help you visualize where that cut is going to happen. The front piece and the back piece are drawn on the same piece of paper, so when you're cutting the front, you do need to go just a little bit under the paper to follow the lines. I forgot to do it here in this video, but it is really helpful if you will cut a little notch to mark the center. Cutting the two sleeve pieces at the same time on this fold will make it so they are mirroring each other, which is perfect. Also, don't forget to cut a little notch to mark the front of the sleeve. That helps later on. I'll fold it again now to cut the back of the body. For the collar, we actually need to fold the fabric perpendicular to the stretch. So we're going to fold it there, cut the collar out, and then we'll be able to use this last little bit to fold and cut 2 more little sleeve cuffs. Just really pay attention to the direction that the fabric will stretch. The first step in sewing is putting the sleeve cuffs on the bottom of the sleeves. It's intentionally a little bit shorter, so I like to start sewing and then I stretch the sleeve cuff out to match the sleeve, and I'm sewing here with a zigzag stitch so that I don't pop stitches out when I pull the sleeves on over my hands. And once that's done, you just repeat for the other side. When both sleeves have their cuffs sewn on, I'm going to set those aside and jump over to the 2 body pieces. I'm going to put right sides together and just make the 2 seams to sew the very top of the shoulder parts together. Finishing up the collar is the most difficult part, but don't panic. If you just take it step by step, you'll get through it just fine. The first part is folding that collar in half, and you're going to sew up the 2 end pieces, and it needs to be inside out when you sew that up. And another thing that I don't do here in the video, but it's really helpful to iron those seams open once you do get that done. And when that is finished, you're going to turn it right side out. Put a pointer finger in each corner, and you're going to kiss those together, and you're going to slowly line up those seams correct sides together so that those seams are matching exactly. And you're going to slowly turn that inside out again with those seams kissing each other. Once you have lined those up exactly, you're ready to sew them together, and you're going to sew right exactly on top of that other seam that's already there. When I sew it, I check a lot to make sure those 2 seams are directly on top of one another. And if you sew this all the way to the corner, your collar will be closed up, but you can also stop anywhere along this edge and it will leave 2 little corners sticking out. And on this project, I leave about 1.5 inches, and it kind of gives it a cute little detail. When I turn it inside out, you can see that mine were a little bit off, so I ended up unpicking and re-sewing it so they would be exactly lined up one with another. If you do prefer the seam to be in the back, I did include an alternate pattern piece. Before I attach it to the body, I'm just using some pins to find the center and the 2 sides so that it will line up a little bit easier. Now I'm going to keep the raw edge of this collar facing up, and I'm going to take the body and I'm going to squish it and put it inside the collar, and I'm going to take those marks and start lining them up, the collar to the body and then on the 2 sides, and I'm going to pin those 4 spots before I get ready to sew it. And it kind of just takes a minute to make sure that it's all lined up. When you're ready to sew, it's going to form a tube, and you just sew right along the edge of that tube, and you're going to notice that you need to stretch one of the layers a little bit to make sure they're lying flat one with another. And it's pretty straightforward to just sew right around, and then you're done with the collar. Next, it's time to add the sleeves with the body laying out flat with the front of the body closer to you. You're going to line up the front of the sleeve with the edges together, and you can actually pin before sewing it, but I was a little bit lazy here and I just went for it. Just finish sewing up that seam, and then you're going to repeat exactly the same thing for the other side. At this point, you only have 3 seams left. 2 of them are just the seam starting at the wrist all the way up the arm and down the body, and then the hem. It is actually important to start at the wrist because the edges of the wrist are finished seams, and if you end up with something a little bit uneven, you're not going to be able to cut those and fix it. Where at the bottom of the hem, if you end there and things are a little bit off, you can just cut it off before you hem it. And you can see that somehow my ending is off by quite a lot, but I'll just trim that off before the final hem. I did make this pattern to be a very long shirt, so you can choose to cut off as much as you would like so the shirt length suits your own personal taste. A little tip for when you are ready to cut the length of the shirt, you can fold the shirt in half and line up the armpits so that when you do cut, the 2 sides will be the exact same length as each other. And when you are ready to come over to the sewing machine, you can use any type of hem technique that you want. I am being the most lazy as possible, and I'm just folding the edge up once, and I am sewing along the edge. I positioned my needle a little bit to the left so that the seam would be closer to that raw edge, and once I've gone around once, I am done.